Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the monthly Lattes and Legislators series. My name is Nick Santucci. I'm the Director of Government and Public Affairs for the Youngstown Moore Regional Chamber. I'm pretty stoked to have two sitting U.S. congressmen here for our Lattes and Legislators, so I'm in my element right now, I have to admit. We want to thank our sponsors, MS Consultants, 717 Credit Union, and the City of Newton Falls. The congressmen both have a really strict and busy schedule today, so I'm not going to go into real broad introductions, but I do want to introduce Congressman Anthony Gonzalez and Congressman Dave Joyce, and I'm actually going to kick it off to them. They're going to share their time and just go back and forth and talk about what's important to them and what they're working on in their offices, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you to both congressmen, and I'm going to let them have the floor. Thank you.
Thanks. Sure. Bob.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks for having us. Always great to be here. Saw the Youngstown State license plates in the parking lot. Can't help but think of my former coach, Jim Tressel, and all the great work that he's doing. For me, it's pretty simple. I focus, 95% of my time on what I call meat and potato issues, jobs in the economy. That's what it's all about for me. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. Father's run a steel business since the year before I was born. And that being in and around that business, growing up here and then working for it as an adult, has always given me a strong perspective on just how important it is to have a strong economic base right here in Northeast Ohio. And so the way that manifests itself for me in Congress is a few different ways. So I'm on the House Financial Services Committee, and I think of financial services as kind of the plumbing beneath the economy. The real economy is what's going on in our factories and in our infrastructure investments and in our healthcare system. That's the real economy. The financial services sector I see as kind of enabling all that and as essential plumbing to make sure that the economy can move. And so what I'm doing on that front is really, frankly, making sure that we're not over-regulating in our financial sector, that we're not choking off innovation, and that we're not unnecessarily harming our rural communities. And this is kind of sort of a technical term, but one of the things that has come out recently is a ruling called CECL, which the accounting board has put on our banks. They've put a pause on it, but basically what this would do is force banks to recognize losses ahead of time, so then they all of a sudden become into the projection business, which I think is the wrong move. So we've worked on that. Secondly, we've had multiple hearings with Chairman Powell, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and that's really about holding the Fed accountable and making sure that they're making decisions that are in the best interest of our economy. Chairman Powell has a perspective, and I agree with this, that the economy right now is starting to soften. We're seeing that in our family business. I'm sure you're seeing that across the board as well. And really, I think there's two things at play there. One is just global uncertainty, period. I think you can put trade in there for sure, but I'll give you a couple more things that are at play. So Brexit, which is advertised is going to happen on October 31st. Boris Johnson is newly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He has said they're going to pull out regardless on October 31st. I think that's creating a lot of uncertainty for sure. We haven't even had a hearing on it, which is disappointing, considering how important the UK is to the global economy. And then Europe in general. The Eurozone just isn't growing the way that it's supposed to. And then also you can move over to China and all the abuses that China has been raining down in our country for a very long time. So I think that's the primary thing that is causing uncertainty. And then the second one is labor uncertainty. So I'm sure if we did a hand raise poll, everybody would say they're having a heck of a time finding workers right now. The labor market is very, very tight, which is a great thing. It's great because people have jobs and wages are finally starting to rise, but it's making it difficult for businesses to make the investments that they would typically make because there aren't workers around. I talked to a guy in my district just the other day who runs a landscaping business, and he is literally up to his ears. I mean, he can't operate right now. because he can't find people. And I've known this guy a long time, and he is as anxious as I've ever seen him in my life, because again, he can't find folks. And so one of the things I'm working on in that regard, I saw Josh Press from Senator Portman's office here. There he is. Working on the Jobs Act, which what the Jobs Act would do is it would expand Pell Grants to short-term training programs. So there are plenty of short-term training programs that provide a great path into the economy that could provide opportunity for individuals who college may not be the right path for. I think that's a lot of people. This would open up the Pell Grant for more than just a four-year college and into those short-term programs. I'm really excited about that. I think that's a way to get more workers back on their feet and back into the economy quickly. Kind of the last thing I would say, shifting away from financial services and workforce, is on the healthcare side. One thing that I've kind of prioritized and said, hey, look, I don't know that I'm seeing a great path forward from a healthcare perspective on either side of the aisle, frankly. And so one thing that I've taken on is, hey, let me see if I can work on a comprehensive healthcare plan that'll lower premium costs, that'll expand coverage, and bring the cost of healthcare down completely. I think that's the biggest problem in the system to me is cost. If you get the cost down, you'll cure some of the budget deficit issues, and you'll also find ways to expand coverage to more than the folks who have it today. So those are the big initiatives that I'm working on in my office. Again, financial services, workforce development, and healthcare. And with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thanks, Anthony, and thank you all for having me. And Nick, the force of nature down here, who he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever want to meet, but he's also so serious about taking care of business for your area that I'm honored to be here. And I'm honored to be here with Anthony, and because he's been certainly a welcome addition to our legislative delegation. One thing I'll say about Ohio, we all work very well together, as all 16 of us in the House, and certainly our two senators, on things that matter for Ohio. And certainly some of the things that matter right here, like Camp Garfield, that's been a all-out surge on behalf of your delegation. Certainly things like the Great Lakes, it's been a full-court press from everybody else. And that's an important part of making things happen or get things done. I've been there now, I'm starting my fourth term. I'm on Appropriations Committee. Anthony talked about being on financial services, or you hear about transportation and infrastructure or other committees. Those are what you call authorizing committees. They have the hearings, and then they talk about the different ways that they're going to spend money and what they want to prioritize in spending money. In appropriations, this is where the rubber meets the road, and we have to determine, well, now that we finally got our budget right before we left, we know what our top line numbers are, and then we determine how much money goes in to fund those things that they've authorized. And that's a group that, a lot of times things that will happen in the authorization committees, like he brought up the rule that they were talking about, sometimes in appropriations, we can't do things that we all would like to do, which is called earmark, which is like target money specifically for projects, because that's banned. What we can do is the reverse of that, where we talk about, we put in legislation that said the federal government will not spend money on. And so things like that, implementing a bill like that that's going to hurt our economy, that's going to take away jobs or screw up the financial affairs of our banks, then that's something we could put into something to stop it until they have a chance to actually process or come to a better conclusion than forcing banks to make different changes or other things that we've implemented throughout the way, saying they cannot spend money on. My two areas, I'm the ranking member on Interior. When you're in the majority, you're the chairman. When you're in the minority, you're the ranking member. And then the other one I'm on is Financial Services and General Governance, two committees of the Appropriations Committee. And just for a quick overview, so for those of you who might not understand how the process works, there's 12 appropriations committees. We'll say the top line budget for ease is $1.2 million. Each department would have $100,000. That $100,000 would then, say, like an Interior, we take the Department of Interior, the National Park Service, the Indian Affairs, we prioritize how we're going to spend all that. And what you try to do is initially, who's ever in the majority puts together their budget. You pass a budget in the House, you pass a budget in the Senate, then there's going to be differences. Then they would go to a conference committee where, as I say, sand off the rough edges to try to get something everybody agrees on. And then that goes to the president for signature. And then we then have the same thing with our 12 budget appropriations committee. Once we get our numbers, we do this, that. The Senate does their version of that with the same bills, and then we sand off the rough edges, and the president would eventually sign it. The trouble is we haven't done that in 23 years. And so you wonder why we get in some financial problems. That's a part of it, because you can't come to a conclusion. This year, the majority didn't even put out a budget. So we spent our 4 months appropriating the numbers that we just made up. So these are our top line numbers in order to get to work. We started holding our hearings and doing all these things. And then just before we left, we finally got the top line numbers. But the problem is that people come up and say, thanks. I really like the number we got for the Park Service. And I said, well, I like that number too. The trouble is it's a false number, because you might have got a 7% increase, but that was on a made-up number. Now that we have the final numbers, we'll come back, and it might be what you got last year, or it might be 3%. And only in Washington, D.C., because they didn't get 7%, they only got a 3% increase, they got cut. You watch. When we get back in September, you'll hear it all the time. But the good part is that we're continuing to work together to bring back for Northeastern Ohio the things that matter. And Anthony hits it on the head. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. We want to make sure the economy works here. And more importantly, we want to make sure that we have a workforce ready for the jobs that we're all trying to bring here. And so I've been working hard with local businesses and schools, and especially our community colleges, to try to train people to the jobs that exist. And whether they're young people coming into the workforce, you want to train to get into manufacturing, because everybody wants to make $1 billion using their phone, but you got to convince young kids that ain't going to happen. I'm that creepy old man who gets on the elevator when they're all looking at their phones and say, hey, good morning, how's everybody doing? And they look at me like the creepy old man, and they go back to looking at their phone. But you have to get their attention and let them understand these manufacturing jobs are great jobs, and there's so many of them out there. Wherever I go through the district, everyone's looking for employees. And Anthony's exactly right. There's so much pent-up capital because people aren't going to buy the extra equipment or aren't going to take the time to put on a third shift because they can't man it right now. But the good part is that that's bringing up wages for everybody. The trouble is we're cannibalizing each other, trying to get the people to work in their shops. So we need to help feed that workforce. So we're getting into the high schools, and now even in the elementary schools, trying to bring manufacturing school. Manufacturing is a job. And that if you go to school, change the mentality that instead of borrowing $100,000 to go to college, if you learn a skill and work, the companies will pay you a salary, and they'll pay for you to go to college. And it may take you 5 years, but at the end of the day, you'll have a job and a degree and no debt and a job that pays good money. I mean, those are important things. And so we got to somehow break that, the idea that, and we're all guilty of it, that you want your kids to go on to college. Well, maybe college isn't meant for everybody, and maybe college can be something that is done in tandem with learning a skill that's actually going to make you an employable asset going forward. And the other thing we have to do is those who have been displaced, because there's the way automation and these phones and everything else has shaken up the economy, that those who have been displaced will be able to get into community colleges and learn new jobs and new skills so they can become part of the working boom that's taking place in this country. Because let's face it, we were all told that we could retire at 65. There'd be plenty of money there. Well, as you get closer to 65, you see more people working. And you realize that that was all premised on us dying at 64 when they set up Social Security. But now the average age is 78, 79, and people are living longer, so they're working longer. And so let's help train those folks for the jobs that exist. You want to work, let's make sure you have the ability to find the training necessary to do that. So those are the things I've been working on, as well as doing my interior work and working together, which has been a pleasure to work with Anthony. And we both, on the way in, we ran into each other and we were talking about last night watching the debates. And, we got stuck for 5 hours one night in the D.C. airport, and we got to watch the first round of debates with Marcia Fudge, and I thought that was pretty entertaining to have her commentary as we were all watching it together. So glad to open it up for, is that what you want to do, Nick? Just open up for questions?
Please raise your hand. We have a microphone that we'll bring around. Hold on one second. You gotta get it.
Sorry, I'm coming.
Congressman Terry Alberini, Newton Falls City Council. We're blessed to have both of you gentlemen here today. We appreciate it. And I think I'm familiar with your dad's company too in Cleveland. I think we do business with them guys as well. Very good company. So we asked Congressman Ryan a few months back this question. Healthcare for small business and for me is absolutely out of control. If you like your doctor, you're supposed to keep your doctor, you know the drill, blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously that didn't happen. So our healthcare premiums in our company, I'm sure other business owners here too as well, have almost tripled on a monthly, as far as a monthly basis. I think our increase this year was projected at $350,000. And as you know, as a small business, that type of burden is absolutely brutal. And everywhere I travel, we have locations all over Ohio, but everywhere I travel, fellow small businesses, the two biggest things, can't get people, number one, healthcare, number two. And I don't mean to put you guys on the spot, but this is the big question. Are we ever going to get this crazy healthcare system fixed? Because the burden on small business is just absolutely brutal. So anyway, thank you for your response.
So I think the answer to are we ever going to get it fixed, I think I lean towards yes on that, which is good. I'll tell you I'll give you some general observations from my perspective on the healthcare system. I don't know if you watched the debate last night. There was one guy up there, Delaney. I don't know him. I've never met him. Don't know anything about him, but I was listening to him. And everything he said about Medicare for All is 100% correct, in my opinion. So if we're in a debate of Medicare for All versus the current system, that's a loser for America because both are broken. Medicare for All, the second you implement it, I think you're going to see rural hospitals shut down all over the country. I represent Wayne County, and I met with the community hospital there and basically asked them this question: what would happen if we went to a Medicare for All system? They said we'd shut down overnight. We can't survive on Medicare reimbursement rates. It's roughly 80 cents on the dollar. Private insurance is 120 cents on the dollar, and that's kind of how community hospitals balance this equation. They look at what they're going to get on Medicare, and then they charge the private insurance the delta between the two. So you would see those shut down immediately. So I think it's a long-term loser, and you'd raise taxes on absolutely everybody. There's no tax the rich and pay for this. No, you can't do that. You have to raise taxes on absolutely everybody if you're being honest about it. So I think that's a broken answer. I also think the current system is broken for every reason you just said. Most people will say, people who want to move towards Medicare for All will say, well, don't we have a free market system today? And I would say absolutely not. We absolutely do not have a free market system today. There is no way in any market you want to talk about, you have price transparency and you have the ability to make quality assessments. In our healthcare system today, that is near impossible. I mean, if you want to figure out what you're going to pay for something in advance, good luck, because most providers can't tell you. And so, to me, where the direction this needs to go is one that is more about setting up an actual market where there's real price transparency, where people are able to and encouraged to make value trade-offs in their healthcare decisions, where they're saying, okay, do I want to go for this Cadillac surgery here, or do I want to go in this other direction because it's going to benefit me financially and from a quality standpoint. So I think the closer we get to an actual market where people are making those trade-offs, I think the better off we'll be. And then the other thing I think that you absolutely have to talk about is getting the cost of prescription drugs down. Those are, especially for our seniors, they're just crippling folks. And so I'm somebody who thinks we need to do a lot more to reform that market in particular, and also make sure there's a heck of a lot more competition. And I'm also open to allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices on that front.
You know, the Affordable Care Act that was implemented there were some parts of it that were good, you know, covering pre-existing conditions. And when the Democrats had a bill this year that they put up, Anthony and I put in an amendment to cover pre-existing conditions for everybody. The Rules Committee, which is operated by the majority, kicked it out, the bill, saying that it wasn't germane to health care. Well, pre-existing conditions, you know, we both got kicked in the teeth with it all of last year, that we didn't care about people who had that. Well, we do care. You know, and I care about the fact that if I want to pay for health care for my kids while they were in college, that's my business, and I want to have the option to be able to do that. I mean, there were some parts of it that made some sense, but there's a lot of parts where it just doesn't work. And I got to tell you, and I think Anthony now is starting to experience the same thing, what I find infuriating is we refuse to have any hearings on things that matter, like health care. You know, it's 1/6 of our economy. And we have experts. We're blessed in Northeastern Ohio because we have experts at leading institutions. Let's face it, the clinic was just number one in the heart care and the overall care. And UH, SUMA, you know, Metro, we've got all these places, and all these presidents have great ideas on how to bring down the cost of health care. We heard none of that. All we did was play this game with our bill that was going to shift the way that you pay premiums. And so for myself, being 62, I've had melanoma. I have a stent, so I've got the pre-existing conditions. Well, right now, my health care, we got that Cadillac plan they all talk about, everybody in Congress has. Kelly and I pay $1,400 a month and $6,000 a year in deductible. So we're at 20 grand before we even see insurance. But that $1,400 a month would have went up 3 to 5 times because it ranged from 50 to 64. They had the ability to triple to quintuple your monthly premium. Now, if it went up to $4,200 to $6,000 a year, $7,000 a year, or a month for your insurance, I mean, who's going to pay that? Right? No one. That's what made absolutely no sense about the bill that we put forward, and that's why I voted against it. We just have to have somehow come together, and I know it's maybe because we're drinking the Washington water, we think that someday they're going to have a bipartisan hearing and actually attack the problem. But you're looking at two guys who want to find solutions. We know there's problems, and we understand because both of us come from businesses, business background. My father worked his way up from labor to CEO of a company, and to him, America's the greatest company country that has ever been put on the planet. And it only gives everybody that opportunity. But when we do something as stupid as making it cost prohibitive for employers who pride themselves on giving this insurance to the workers, we make it cost prohibitive where they're weighing whether I just give people raises and stop giving health care, which forces them all into the market, which I'm convinced was the plan of Affordable Care Act. It doesn't make sense. And Anthony hit another one, and it wasn't just the small rural hospitals. I had UH in 2 weeks ago and put that same question to them, and they said Medicare for all, we shut down. We can't afford to operate under the less than 2% margins that we're at right now on trying to make things happen, because it doesn't take into consideration what they do for the overall healthcare field and the research that's being taken in at UH and the clinic as well. And so they said if we're forced to compete with somebody who's just doing x-rays, when we have all this other overhead in those x-rays, we can't be as transparent with our numbers. But we do have to make people part of the process. And so let's face it, like if myself, for my situation, and if I smoke 3 packs a day, I don't. And if you drink every day, maybe a beer. But if you're going to raise your own, okay, that goes into your factoring, and if you're going to be overweight and you're going to have these other problems, and those are things that would matter in how you're going to, and you know that, so you're going to pay more because you've made these decisions on your own. And if you're in good shape and you're taking care of yourself and you're doing the annual physicals and all things are necessary, then you could have the ability to help bring your costs down. And I've seen that system in play in Geauga County. When we went through the county, when I was on the budget commission there, we went into it with other counties and forced people to be part of the process. And it's amazing how soon people started getting up and going for walks instead of eating their lunch at their desk, and encouraging other people to start walking. And we gave people $30 a month to go work out at the local club, and how people took you up on that. But guess what? You had to show you went at least 10 times during the month. That was frustrating for some folks, and who knows, they may went in there and had a pop and left, but, at least you try to force the conversation to get people involved in making these decisions on their own health care. And that's got to be part of the equation too. But the most fundamental part is we have to have hearings and treat it like the problem it is, because if we all pretend that it's just the costs just aren't going up, they're going to spiral out of control, and then you're going to end up with some system that none of us want.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you so much for coming here today to the city of Newton Falls. I'm Dave Lynch, the city manager. That's our city seal behind you. And you'll notice that our slogan is working toward a better tomorrow. And we're well represented today. Councilman Alberina, you met. Councilman Stimpert is here. And Mayor Lyle Waddell, who is on his way to being a certified economic development specialist. And that kind of gets to my question, because that seal says a better tomorrow. Well, for Newton Falls, part of a better tomorrow means the implementation of the missile defense base. And so we're all very, very hopeful for that. 38 days ago, a congresswoman from New York State said in a press release that the missile defense base was going to some location in the state of New York and not to Camp Garfield. Is it reasonable for Congress to pass a resolution to have Congresswoman Stefanik drawn and quartered?
I'll let the experienced legislator take that one.
Well, it's interesting that Elise stepped up like that, because as far as I understood, New York wasn't even in the hunt. It was between Michigan and us, and that's been the competition all along. But, that's impassioned pleas that are made on behalf of concerned legislatures trying to draw this type of activity to their district. And we're lucky, because rather than have one person out there shouting like she is, we have a whole delegation working in concert. And it's funny because, I work with the Michigan delegation on Great Lakes things. But when it comes to this issue, there's a line in the sand. It's sort of like Ohio State, Michigan football days, right?
Yeah.
There's no middle ground on that issue.
No, there's not.
And so we're going to do what we have to do and continue to fight for it. But, that is a decision that we've all been waiting on. But we weigh in whenever we get the chance, with letters, with phone calls. And certainly it never hurts for you all to pitch in and talk about, the local community support and how much it would mean to the communities as well.
Yeah, and Dave mentioned that, the Ohio delegation works really well together across party lines on things like this, and I think this is the perfect example. We led a letter in our office, everybody signed it, that basically made the case for Northeast Ohio specifically, and I think it's an incredible case. I don't know anything about Elise's district, Stefanik's district, but I know that if they put the missile defense site here, that this would be an incredible, incredible investment that we could make, because we have everything we need. And so we're going to keep carrying that torch and do everything we can to get it completed.
She's got Fort Drum in her district. She's got enough. Got to spread the wealth around the country.
Yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. You said
Only
you're
one's allowed.
Okay, fine, then I'll just have one question. All right, we have an issue with trade jobs, supplying all of the businesses with workers. We here in Newton Falls alone have 2 empty schools, and all of our schools in the state are hurting very badly, all of them, whether it's irrelevant why, but they're hurting badly. We have 2 empty school buildings. One of my suggestions, I talked to one of the board members, why not with one of them that's on our campus, because we have all 3 of our schools on one campus, offer that to like TCTC, Trumbull County, or it's a vocational school. Offer that to help our school system here out for a trade school. The other one, okay, why can't it become a trade school? Some of the businesses, the regional chamber, get it going as a trade school of a different nature. We've got TDDS down the road on 534. Help out and bring that here, or anywhere really, but help that for local jobs and to train. that it's available, the buildings are there, they're set up already as schools, and bring that along and expound on it, expand it, so that we can get those.
Those are all great ideas, and it should happen, and that's something you should probably take up with your state reps.
Well, okay, they're not here. I'm sorry, but you guys are. Help us out here.
Yeah, but, those are kind of decisions that when you're talking about local school boards and state funding, are things that those decisions have to be made there. What we do, when we talk about funding, is more try to make sure that the state secures it, and then once the state has that funding, then the state makes the allocations. But those are the spot on about training folks. Because we have the Auburn Career Center up in Lake County, and I was proud to say when I ran into the superintendent the other day, he's busting at the seams. It wasn't quite that 6 years ago. But, Lincoln Electric came in and donated the welders so that people, they're not the real welders, but they also have the ones you'd learn on. Because they let me do it so I could fail miserably and they could see, but I didn't hurt anything when I was doing it. But those kind of things are important because they were telling me that somebody welding can make 80 to 100 grand. That's how important welders are, and that's how hard they are to find. Truck drivers, very important. CNC operators. And Anthony hit on it before. I mean, you also see now, because of the lack of the workforce, it's bringing up wages all over. When's the last time you saw Dunkin' Donuts saying help wanted and put out a number of what they're paying per hour? And then you see McDonald's down the street upping that, because everybody's out there, and that's bringing the cost of wages up, or the costs up for everybody, because the wages are going up, and so that's an important part. Instead of saying, one of the big arguments you have in D.C. is, well, we set minimum wage at $15. Well, if a guy at McDonald's is paying 3 people at 10, guess what? Now have 2 people at 15 and one person's out of job. That isn't a very good economic theory. We want to make sure that we continue to do the things what we're doing now, is create the atmosphere in which businesses are investing in themselves. They're creating more jobs. More jobs are paying better, so it's getting harder and harder for people to find, they don't have to worry about minimum wage jobs. They can have a pick of jobs if they do it. And they need the training then. Hopefully they get that entry-level job. I don't think anybody ever starts off working at McDonald's or one of those minimum wage jobs thinking, boy, this is great. I'm going to do this the rest of my life. Those are entry-level jobs. But you get the enthusiasm of making their own money, that then they want to do better for themselves. And maybe they don't want to go on to college. They go to these trade schools and learn a vocation in which they can make a real living. And those are the kind of things that we need to continue to foster. And that's what we're trying to do by making sure that the state has that money and our community colleges have that money to be able to do that. And then, I'm not trying to put it off on you or your state reps, but that's where it's very helpful, because we all acted in concert up there in northeastern Ohio to push things for the Career Center, working community college with both Tri-C and Lakeland to make that happen.
And then just to add on that a little bit, so I think in general, all the incentives are pushing people towards four-year college. Or the overwhelming majority of the incentives in our system are pushing students to the four-year college. The percent of people who actually graduate from college has been pretty sticky for a long time. It's about a third of the population, and that doesn't fluctuate that much. So that means that there's 2/3 of the population who aren't being served in that capacity. And so what are we doing for those 2/3? And to me, that goes back towards this Jobs Act that I talked about earlier. The Jobs Act, again, would allow you to apply a Pell Grant for a short-term training program like something in the skilled trades. Well, if there are more opportunities like that we're supporting at the federal level, I think it'll be a lot easier to make the case to the local reps, or to the state reps and to the local community. Hey, look, we're getting the support from the federal government now, we're getting the incentives right, but we need to start opening trade schools here in our county. I think if we do a better job of aligning the incentives correctly and being more realistic about what paths make sense for people, I think that'll make your job easier, and it'll make it easier for you to make the case. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking through it, is let's get the incentives right, and let's be honest with ourselves about how many kids are actually going to college and who that makes sense for. Because as Dave said, and there are great jobs. This happened to my brother. My brother went to a four-year college, took out a ton of debt, tried to make it in the financial services world for a couple years. I could have told you when I was 5 that wasn't going to work for him. Not because he's not smart enough, he's plenty smart. He's a guy who wants to work with his hands. That's who he is. He's been that way forever. He's the guy who wanted to go out and mow the lawn. He's the guy who wanted to fix my dad's car, Like that's who he was. He's been that way forever. And so he left that world, became an electrician. He's doing better now than he's ever done in his life, and he's happier. And that's a success story in my eyes. And we need to make sure that we're encouraging that at the federal level.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jeff Herman with the Business Journal. We're locally owned and operated by the Youngstown Publishing Company, so thank you for being here today. We're not going to ask about Libra and the viability of digital currency. I enjoyed your testimony last week.
I'd love to talk about that, but
Yeah,
it's a little boring. But
so economic development, of course, is on all of our minds. And one thing we can't do is wait for the next big company to come in and drop 1,000 jobs on us. How do we build a culture of entrepreneurship? Because we ultimately want to keep our kids here, right, and stem the brain drain. Ohio ranks very high. I need to get farther away from that speaker, I guess. We rank very high in brain drain, so how can we shift it to a brain gain? What can we do to build a culture of entrepreneurship? Thank you.
I'll start on that one. So I think, frankly, to me, this is the biggest challenge that we have as a region. If you were to say, how do you grow your economy? I don't know how you grow an economy at, mid-single-digit rates. Let's say we set a target. We want to grow our regional economy at 5% annually. Let's say we wanted to do that. You can't do that without people. So you need more people coming into the community. Some of that, not to go back into the state world, I think some of that we can incentivize through our state tax code to make sure that more folks want to be here. But in addition, in terms of a culture of entrepreneurship, there's no magic recipe for that. But what I think is required is a handful of things. One, we need funding. So we need venture funding. We need private capital to come into the market. I think, and one thing I'm actually looking at right now is mentioning earlier with you was
I'm about to ask that question.
okay was finding ways to take advantage of the new Opportunity Zone legislation in the sense of so we have the tax incentives, right? Now what my next question is there something that we can do at the federal level where we are pushing more capital, direct capital, into our communities for investment purposes? And I think we can do it. There's a lot of different kind of regional venture capital, private equity groups, like Jumpstart is one in this area, that are kind of what you need, but you need more. And my question is for communities like ours, where we've seen the quote-unquote brain drain, where we've seen population leave, where we've seen industry leave, is there a way that we can incentivize at the federal level and get dollars directly back into the community? I think that'll build our capital base. That's an important component of this. But then we also, frankly, we need our entrepreneurs to win. We need a handful of success stories. We need 5 people to become 10, to become 100, to become 200. This thing needs to sort of build off of itself. And that happens at the ground level. But I think if we get the capital right, we get the tax structures right, and we have the great educational institutions pushing great entrepreneurial content, then I think that the system will kind of start to feed on itself. But this is a very, very sticky and difficult problem, admittedly.
One of the most interesting things I saw during the last year was that a certain congresswoman from New York who fought against Amazon bringing their headquarters to New York. And the congressman right in the district just to the east of her, Greg Meeks, great guy, I see him in the morning working out. And he says, I don't know about her, but there's a whole lot of people in my district who like those $15 an hour jobs. And they want that headquarters there. And I'm surprised, when Amazon came here, they've actually done us some favors in that if you look what they did with Euclid Square Mall, what they've done with North Randall, and now they're going to do with Rolling Acres. But, granted, they're changing the way we do business. And, I was in a Walmart yesterday where now Walmart does shopping to go and delivers shopping to you and all. But it was interesting to find when I visited Amazon that they're also subsidizing workers and giving them like $10,000 in startup capital to start their own transportation so they can be delivery folks too, and creating those little small businesses and the momentum that was generated from that. And, so having the big magnet one is something we got to continue to try to attract, because as you well know, the exponential effect of one of those, it's the mom and pops who make pieces, parts, the enterprise is going to rent the cars, the vans for the delivery, it's the people who at the restaurants are going to feed all those folks. That's an important part of trying to attract those big picture ones, and we certainly work together on trying to bring those here. But, in the meantime, yeah, I think what's going to drive northeastern Ohio, or Ohio as a whole, is going to be water. You look out west, and some of the problems that they have out there now with water, and that's one of the reasons I fought so hard, and Anthony's been a very good soldier with me in fighting for this. But the Great Lakes and the restoration initiative that we're doing, on top of creating jobs, on top of creating a great atmosphere for people to come and still continue to use the fish and hunt. And you'll get this one. I was doing a talk the one day, and I looked up and it said we have 23 million people visit Ohio in the Great Lakes to look at birds. Birds. I thought, this is nuts. So I'm up at Ashtabula, and I go to one of the wineries. They say, oh, yeah, we get all kinds. We had a couple from France who came here to see some birds. Really? And then you go to the hotel or the bed and breakfast, and you say, yeah, we're getting people from all over. That was one of those things where, in working on the bigger picture type thing, the little things, when we're doing the restoration in the Great Lakes, we're also putting in these bird habitats and creating along the lakefront. It's creating the development for the birds, to the point where we had the EPA in because we were having the Ashtabula River taken off what's called an area of concern, AOC. That term gets thrown around a lot in DC, so I wanted to qualify it. And we're one of the only ones that are getting delisted from being an area of concern. And on cue, when the EPA director's talking, there goes an eagle. I go, come on, somebody let that loose, right? But there is. I mean, it's doing those little things that we've been trying to do, and trying to find the bigger picture things and helping bring businesses here. They're going to create the other opportunities for small business, engaging entrepreneurs in this area to be able to take advantage of those situations and capitalize on them. One of the things I know, I've been working in the cannabis industry because, let's face it, 47 states, they have it in some way, shape, or form. And you see what happens in Canada, Constellation Brands and, Anheuser-Busch, they're all going and taking over these things up there. That's exactly what you wouldn't want to happen here in the United States. You want to have it just like with the craft brewers, so if it's going to come, then there's going to be small operations that move into communities that want those jobs and be able to feed an industry and create the businesses. We have a grow operation, if you will, right now in Eastlake. And, they're now up to employing 60 people, be up to 80 by the end of the month. And, whether you want it or not, it's come to Ohio. So it's something that has to be dealt with, and it's come to 47 other states. So let's deal with it and what it is. And I look at it as, all right, it's here, so let's make it part of the system. That's why I've been fighting right now, because of federal law, they're not allowed to use the banking system. Well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. It's a legitimate going concern ratified by the state. The state laws are in effect that have implemented it, and the companies that are doing the business, but we're going to make it an all-cash operation. Now, if you went to the bank, if you went down to the car store and spent $20,000 on a car, cash, they'd file a SAR, right? A suspicious activity report on you. But we'll take, in Denver, on Fridays, they have all the armored cars lined up for these operations because they come into the city and county and they pay their taxes, $100,000 in cash. No SARs filed, glad to take it. So, Illinois is going to full legal because they think that's going to help them be able to pay off their pension liabilities and their other things. I mean, some states are seeing it as, this is here, let's deal with it, and try to take the black market out of existence and create a market that the states are in control of. And that's something that is a pure states' right issue and something that should be developed slowly as the state or the community see fit. But again, I view it as a small, town by town, county by county type venture.
Hi, Rick Stockberger, President and CEO of the Tech Belt Energy Innovation Center. We're right down the street in Warren, Ohio. And I want to thank you guys so much for coming to the Mahoning Valley and being a part of it here. So Jeff, thanks for setting up the Opportunity Zone question. But But I believe wholeheartedly in entrepreneurship. It's one of the most important things we can do. 90% of the jobs that have been created since the recession have been created by companies that didn't exist before the recession. So we know we're on the right track when it comes to entrepreneurship. One of the things that I've been looking at and working on, and the White House Opportunity Revitalization Council is touring Northeast Ohio right now, and they'll be in the Mahoning Valley on Monday next week. Trying to look at that, we have John Lattee from the Economic Innovation Group that's coming here in September, who's really led the charge in DC on a lot of this work. And then Derek Morgan, a former NFL player, just announced a $70 million Opportunity Zone fund that he's been working on. One of the things that we have in Northeast Ohio that we're very blessed with is a lot of really great professional football players, including one up there.
That's very average, but thank you.
Well, you're a really good local player
Thank you.
and a great
Thank
Buckeye. So at any rate, trying to figure out the ways that we can leverage the Opportunity Zones to work in places like Northeast Ohio and coming up with coalitions of folks. And so with Derek Morgan kind of leading the charge on that, is that something that we can possibly do to leverage investment in that way? So we're not looking at necessarily charity or from any of these folks. We're looking at making real investments from them back into the communities that they're from, as well as leveraging venture capital that's looking here from all over the country as we see the rise of the Rest Fund and all of these other things that are coming forward. How do we leverage these things meaningfully? And will you help us? So
The last question is the easiest one. Yes, of course, right? So, yeah, I think, of all the issues that I talk to folks back home on the ground about in the investing community, Opportunity Zones is the one that probably creates the most buzz and energy. I think what we need to do at the federal level is we need to define the rules of the road. Right now, there's a good bit of uncertainty in terms of exactly what they are and how they're going to work. So I think we could do a heck of a lot better at providing real certainty and saying, here's what we mean by Opportunity Zones, here's what the rules are, and now with that certainty, I think it'll be more than just people raising capital, it'll be raising and deploying capital, which I think is what you really want. And then in terms of, how do we take best advantage, and this is kind of to piggyback off the previous question. So I spent some time in Silicon Valley. I ran a small tech company for 2 years. Got my MBA at Stanford, lived out there for 3.5 years. In the belly of the beast, I don't particularly care for Silicon Valley from a culture standpoint, but one thing that they get right is this innovation. And the culture from an entrepreneurship standpoint is one of collaboration. The amount of collaboration and kind of industry information that's traded back and forth between these startups and tech companies is actually pretty incredible. It's one thing that they get right. And I think, my observation is that sometimes as a region, we get a little bit less collaborative than we should. I think I worry sometimes that we're trying to grab our piece of the pie and hold it with dear life, as opposed to, okay, how do we expand the pie across the board? I think if we, from a regional perspective, embrace that second ideology, which is how do we collaborate and how do we build a bigger pie for everybody, I think we'll ultimately go much further. And so I think it's kind of two things. There's the certainty piece. We need that. It's more than just raising capital, it's deploying capital. But then as a community, I think we need to be much more collaborative and supportive of all businesses, all walks of life, no matter who you are, where you're from, to make sure that we're supporting one another in what is, you're an entrepreneur, what is an incredibly difficult path, which is starting a business from scratch, hiring people, putting your family through that kind of stress, putting yourself through that kind of stress. I have so much respect for entrepreneurs because I know how difficult it is. And we need to do everything we can to make it easier. You can do that with culture.
Hey there, Alex Pavlov from the Ohio Secretary of State's office. Recently, we've seen in the area a number of ransomware attacks on local governments. What role does the federal government play there? Is there a role? Should we be looking to you guys for help on that? And bigger picture, how do you see cybersecurity impacting kind of all three levels of government?
It's unfortunate that local communities are also getting attacked as well as businesses. One thing I've become aware of throughout the district now is people calling the office saying that they've had their computer hijacked or their system hijacked, and they have to pay ransom to be able to get back to operation, and there's no guarantee that that's going to stop the problem going forward. It could happen again as soon as people feel they need to call on it again and lock up their systems. Anthony's I'd be much better suited for the answer of that, since he understands this stuff more than I do. I got him to explain to me what Bitcoin was the other day. I only wish I would have shorted Bitcoin. It was at $20,000, but that's another story. But the development itself is something that there's a company I just visited the other day in Mentor, where they're doing the security and the transactions called Cardinal, and they're owned by Visa. And so talking about the data points that you have and how they secure, knowing that card's going to be yours, and all the work that goes into securing those transactions online. And so they were talking about the fine line they run between privacy of the data and then trying to secure, so making sure there's only valid people entering into their system. And it's getting tougher and tougher for them all the time because you have people who do nothing but this. And in some cases, unfortunately, we probably have other countries that have people in their military who are doing it time and time again, trying and hacking into our system. So there's a full-time offense against us. It's time that we make sure that we put the resources behind the defense against us, and I'll leave it to Anthony to explain the defense.
So, the Mueller report came out, however many months ago now at this point, about, Russian interference in the election and whatnot. The one thing that they touched on the least, which I actually think is probably the most important, is the protection of election infrastructure. And the reason, frankly, so after the Mueller report came out, I read the whole thing and basically saw election infrastructure and the actual electoral process as the one place where we might be able to find some bipartisan agreement. We're not going to find bipartisan agreement on the vast majority of that, but what we should find bipartisan agreement on is how do we actually secure our elections. I think that's something every American should be passionate about. And so I joined a bipartisan group of freshmen. Most of the Democrats have an Intel background and had dealt with this in various capacities, just not on the election side. And so we brought in a bunch of different experts across the board, and what we basically found was Russia has actually been doing this sort of thing forever, since as far back as the 50s, openly trying to bribe Goldwater. And none of this got reported really, but basically they've been dealing with this in every single election through the Cold War. And what Putin did essentially was just take that playbook and re-implement it, but use new technology like social media. The one thing that is different, and again this wasn't covered, was ransomware attacks on Secretary of State's office, on county boards of election, where they're going in and messing with the poll books, or God forbid if they're able to get in and change votes. And so to me, what we need to be doing at the federal level is we can provide, and the group I'm in is working on putting a bill forward that would do just this. We can provide guidance and funding to help state boards of election and county boards of election to protect themselves from these attacks. We at the federal level know a heck of a lot about what's going on from a ransomware standpoint, and we need to be pushing that information down to our secretaries of state so that they can secure the election, the electoral process. Another thing that I think would be interesting is to fund an opportunity for what are called white hat attacks, which are basically you hire a company to try to attack your system. And from that, you're able to uncover a bunch of different vulnerabilities so that then you can shore it up. So to me, that's kind of where the federal government should be spending its time, is let's help secretaries of state protect the election infrastructure because there are vulnerabilities. And we actually kind of know a good bit about what those are. Now we need to share that information and provide some funding. And then the last was Dave said I explained Bitcoin, so my quick Bitcoin story. I heard about Bitcoin in 2012 as a first-year MBA at Stanford, and I thought, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. It was like 2 cents at the time. So don't take investing advice from me when it comes when it comes to things like Bitcoin. But great question.
So that concludes the lattes and legislators. So I want to thank both congressmen for being here. Really grateful for your time. I also want to thank our sponsors, 717 Credit Union, MS Consultants, and of course the City of Newton Falls. And also cheap plug, our next lattes and legislators is going to be August 8th with Ohio Supreme Court Justice Judy French. So we hope that you will come back and spend some time with us. It's going to be a great conversation there as well. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.